Hello, everyone. My name is Allison Langerak-Tuzo. I'm the director of ARAS, the Archive for Research in Archetypal Symbolism, and I'd like to welcome you to the 12 Steps, Symbols, Myths, and Archetypes of Recovery with Kikan Massara. For newcomers to ARAS, we're an archive dedicated to symbolic imagery as it appears across cultures and historical periods. Our collection probes the universality of archetypal themes and provides a testament to the deep connections that unite the human family. Our website is aras.org, and there you'll find our fully digitized collection of images and commentaries, a concordance of C.G.Jung's collected works, a library of articles on art and psyche, and many more resources. We have a very special presentation to share with you today. After the presentation, we will have some time to take questions. So I would like to encourage you all to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you have questions or thoughts that you would like to share. And now I would like to give you some background on today's presenter. Kikan Massara is a Swedish-born, Paris-based psychotherapist, author, and creative. As a dedicated researcher of consciousness studies, meditation, and emotional health, Kikan has long used art, myths, and symbols to facilitate access to the empowering resources of the inner world. The discovery in her late teens of the works of C.G.Jung and other esoteric literature led her down numerous paths of exploration in adulthood, including complementary and alternative health. These quests eventually formalized in becoming an accredited psychotherapist in the early 1990s in the UK. Holding an MA in psychotherapy and counseling, she has worked as a therapist in London, Stockholm, and Paris. She is also an advanced practitioner of the meridian tapping method, EFT. Kikan perceives this chaotic era of the human collective as an invitation to put heart and soul into evolving one's own consciousness, and credits her inner work with the messy contradictions of being a woman, mother, partner, and friend as invaluable practice grounds for evolving as a helping professional. She is currently working on a book on human emotions and is considering focusing on grief counseling in her practice. Kikan is a longtime friend of ARAS and has spent many hours in our archive. As she says, ARAS seamlessly weaves in and out of her creative life and overall well-being. Welcome, Kikan. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Alison. It's absolutely true that I love ARAS, and I thank you for the opportunity to come and present the book and ideas, around symbolic perception. And also want to say welcome to everyone who is with us today. I can't see you, but I know that that there is a bunch of you out there. And so I'm going to begin by sharing So I'll begin with a few thoughts that I have around symbolic perception itself. It is, there are many ways of knowing that we have been endowed with, and symbolic perception is one of them. And what's so remarkable about it is that it focuses on the whole rather than the parts that, the different parts that separate from one another that the mind would so easily get into. And so, and it sort of plugs into the deeper layers of the human psyche. And as a result, we connect up with an intuitive reading or knowing of a subject, of a topic that we're focused on. And this is, it's actually like a whole body experience of something rather than a thinking approach. And this is what one of my favorite authors on symbolic perception has written about it. He says, his name is Edward Whitmont, he was a Jungian analyst and author. Symbolic approach can mediate an experience of something indefinable, intuitive, or imaginative, or a feeling sense of something that can be known or conveyed in no other way, since abstract terms do not suffice everywhere. And that's the point. And you know, the other thing about symbolic perception is that it's a very empathic way of looking at things. And this can be very helpful if you're writing about things that I write about in this book. It is, after all, if the subject is as forbidding and complex as addiction and as mysterious as 12-step recovery from addiction, then it helps to use myths and images and metaphors and such in order to just maybe elicit a bit of a compassionate view, because these are subjects that actually they call for a compassionate heart and an open-minded view from the reader. And just Jung, he thought that symbols also were linked to truth. And so he said, there are not too many truths, there are only a few. Their meaning is too deep to grasp other than in symbols. So I just read this too. It is no secret that human beings are more wired for visual and symbolic communications than they are for words. Just like the breath and heartbeat are continuous, so are those internal image streams that process, order, and deliver staggering amounts of data to the brain. It could not be done by spelling letters of an alphabet. The roots of our predisposition for symbolic imagery can be found in humanity's collective unconscious. Its timeless treasures are transmitted mainly through symbolic, metaphoric, visual, and intuitive languages. These have long been thought of as our universal language, and to read symbols has been considered a sacred art. Now, even though I say that symbolic perception is innate to us, it can also really be stimulated. And I can look back on my upbringing and know just that I really was honed for it in a way. I was born and I grew up in the very north of Sweden, and it's a place where you become very aware of changes between light and dark, and except that it's never really dark, because the snow always holds so much light and the sky is always so close that if there is even a hint of a moon, you see things. And it gives this ephemeral kind of spaciousness where you see into things. That's what I feel. And it's nearly like a liminal space. And so I remember lying on my back in the snow, staring up into the sky and seeing so much happen out there. And I'm not talking about the magnetic storms, of northern lights and such. It was just activities all the time. And it just gave this sense that life extended very far and wide. And this eventually just led to, I could say that I would get scared about getting lost in space should I ever, go out there. But I was also excited by this kind of expansive version of seeing life everywhere. And I ended up leaving Sweden, traveled to quite a lot of faraway places. I've lived in a few cultures, and my path has been very meandering, and I would even call it quite crooked. But I'm extremely happy that it led to writing this book. And the inspiration for this book came when I was visiting a friend of mine called Sandra in London. And when you stay with her, you sleep with a wall of books behind you. And we have a lot of shared interests. And one of the things that join us as well is that we have both spent time in Japan. And I was looking through some of her books on Japanese culture before going to sleep. And I saw, some of these images of these stones that are placed usually in very serene waters, in the temple gardens and private gardens there. And it also brought to mind, this passion I had for stones as I grew up. And at our grandparents' place, I used to just love jumping from stone to stone to stone to stone. But in the north, when the snow melted and it swelled the rivers, this wild rush of waters, I also remember being told that there would always be places, to cross even this sort of crazy rush. So I went to sleep with all of this, and the first thing that happened in the morning was this, what can I call it? It was this phrase, really. It just came. I know that it came from somewhere here. And it just went, what a pity that the 12 steps have not yet been visually narrated. And those words came with me ever since, but I was busy doing other things. Oh, here we have an image, sorry, from the north of rushing water. Yes, I was busy doing this. I was busy trying to make the inner world and inner work user-friendly because apps were happening. And I didn't have time really to engage in any other adventures. I was also in a relationship at the time with a man who traveled a lot, and on those trips, I mean, what stands out now is just that I got particularly obsessed with skies and seas, and also my dream world started to call me to write down my dreams more conscientiously. And I've had a dream theme most of my life, my adult life, which had to do with finding my writing desk. Then it could be found, under the mud in a Dutch canal or in the attic of an abandoned house in Sweden, what have you. But that which really stood out was this sense of wanting to have the sort of the conduit between my conscious and unconscious self really clean and working. And also, wherever I went, I would see stones and steps and stairs and thresholds and cracks, shamanic cracks, like the one on the left, which I found in San Pedro de Atacama in Chile. And the number 12 also kept showing up all over the place. And I noticed that in museums and in exhibitions, I would be very drawn to certain themes, and they were sometimes juxtapositions, like the figure on the left, that represent for me somehow the hero's myth and a very tired hero's myth. And then other images that spoke about community, the warm embrace of community, or interdependence, or connection, that kept on happening. And images kept on coming to me. I mean, they didn't stop. And I collected them. And in books, I basically took screenshots because I hadn't learned any other techniques. And here I can see that two of them actually ended up in the book, but, you know, hundreds upon hundreds would not. And these images, in one way or another, reminded me of these remarkable 12 steps. And eventually, I put the app projects aside, and at the same time, the relationship ended, and I can see now that the quest had begun. The very first thing I did was to go to New York and to sit at the wonderful table in ARAS and you know, look at images, collect images, what have you. But very soon after arrival, I went up to AA World Services offices on Riverside Drive, you know, because the 12 steps, after all, originate with AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and they have a library at their offices and the archives. And so I wanted to go through the whole library there and just see, you know, what had been illustrated. And to my absolute shock, nothing had. There was, of course, the book that started it all, but that's basically images from one of the original manuscripts of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And then there were a bunch of cartoons about drunks that I also found. But the photograph on the left was as I was leaving after hours of going through every book. And somebody said, "But don't you want to be photographed in Bill W.'s sofa?" It was in his writing den. And I, yes. So there I am in my coat. And middle is, of course, ARAS on one of my days there. So I then spent a couple of weeks gathering images and also began to write a book proposal. And the image on the right became really my symbol for engaging in this unknown. It's an image that I feel has a sort of the hand of something benevolent that would keep me safe on this journey. Now, my first images, or rather my image narratives, were all about, they were all about my associations, really, with the steps. And the step 2, I associate with light at the end of tunnel, dawns, new beginnings, horizons, light coming through the cracks, etc., etc., etc. It's a hopeful step, but that was my association. And here I have one image narrative from step 4, which I really associated with self-knowledge and also doing, you know, working with your shadow content to integrate what has been abandoned and rejected, etc. You know, to work with that consciously and bring it into the light of consciousness and to become part of who we are, so to speak. And I also associated it with standing in one's naked truth and to have courage to look for self-knowledge and to have the humility to accept what one finds. And so that was going on there. And then that went on for quite some time. Now, Ami Rönnberg, who is on the left, was director of ARAS for many years. And she's a fellow Swede, and we became dear friends. And so we would speak with each other with some regularity. And in one of our calls, we talked about, you know, what to do with this book proposal and what, you know, she was the editor-in-chief of the Book of Symbols, which was published by Taschen, and we talked about whether they could be interested, and both of us thought, not really, you know. Book on addiction, recovery from addiction, no. They might be, risk-taking and trailblazing, but by the end of the conversation, we decided to send it as a symbolic gesture for the proposal to go out there, and thought that it was a good idea to send it on the summer solstice, which is the day of the most light in the year in the Northern Hemisphere. And of course, that's again a very Swedish thing to do, to honor the seasons and the cycles of the year. And also, that had its own journey, and it eventually led to a contract, which really quite extraordinary. And sometime after that, Ami suggested that we would go on a pilgrimage to Jungian destinations in Switzerland, which we did. It was an incredibly wonderful journey. And Jung's home in Küsnacht had just opened to the public, I think a week or so before we arrived. And there is Ami on the steps going down to the lake where Jung could possibly have had his little rowboat, I don't know. And in the middle, this just a rather bad photograph from Bollingen, from one of his stone sculptures, because we had the enormous privilege of visiting Bollingen with one of Jung's relatives. And on the right is the mythical table of Eranos in Ascona by the Lake Maggiore, also in Switzerland. And this is where for 70 years, people from many different fields came together to exchange ideas and give lectures. I mean, there is, you could speak about it for hours. The luminaries that have met there, Jung went there regularly. I mean, there's no point even going into how many, their history. It's an incredible place, and I spent every day writing there, that we visited. And so then back in ordinary reality, back in Paris, I found writing quite difficult, and I found it difficult to kind of get a grasp. I realized that I had to have a substantial amount of writing in the book, not just images. And I kept a board handy so that I could just, collage my frustrations again and again, and I never glued any of them. And these two were photographed, and I think it was because they looked very neat and tidy. But it was a period of having to let go again and again and again and again. I had so much will in all kinds of directions, and I was just coming into realizations just how much I was driven by will, and I had to let go. There were changes of editors, there were changes all the time. But I could say that eventually it moved, things began to really happen. And I went back to the States to delve much deeper into research in images from AA's history. And there on the left is actually another photograph that someone suggested he would take. I'm sitting in Bill W.'s writing hut, which he called Wit's End, with two of his books in my hands. Because Stepping Stones, which was his home, and Lewis's, his wife's home, is a foundation that has a lot, substantial amount of documentation. So I spent time researching there and found, to my absolute joy, some really unusual documentation or images, that are included in the book. And I'm just looking here at my notes. If there's anything I want to say about that more. It was quite difficult to find images that had copyrights or in high enough resolution for the section on AA history. But anyway, it got done, and eventually on the right you can see that it was the first time I printed out the text, and I'd also created a mock cover of the book, because I had this inner gestalt that it needed to be two hands holding each other, given that 12-step recovery is very much about helping one another recover. And there were also all kinds of image rights processes going on at the time, just before, well, we were supposed to deliver. The quality control back in Germany decided that 50 of the 200 images were not of good enough quality to use. You know, that's a lot of images to replace in a short period of time. And I was very, very lucky in having a team in Los Angeles of Jessica Hunley, who was the external editor, and Nick Taylor of Thunderwing, who was the designer of the book. They helped finding replacement images, and ironically, all of this took place at the time when someone had accidentally spilled a cup of hot tea on my computer. So it was a real scrambling act. But on this photograph, a statue of Pachamama is being photographed, because in Paris I'd seen exhibitions, or I'd seen paintings, or I'd seen sculptures that also needed to be photographed, and that was really a lot of fun. And so you could say that the process was very much being in a kind of symbolic perception, image receptive state of mind 24/7. And I would see something, for example, like these hands that I saw at the Egyptian collection in Berlin to the left. And then I would bring back a symbol of it, the postcard, and place it on my little symbolic baby easel to look at it. And then it led to this image being chosen for the cover, which is deeply moving. And yes, I think that is about it there. But you know, once the manuscript had been delivered to the printers, I came face to face with all kinds of questions, including, you know, where did the fire come from? Where did the passion come from to stay the course? And of course, my love and respect for the 12 steps was obvious, and so was being in the helping professions. Of course, wanting to be of service, absolutely, but it felt a lot deeper than that. And there is, I mean, I do all kinds of things that to connect me up with symbols or symbolic ways of seeing things. And in this case, I did something I call living questions. I take a question like that and send it off in a ritualistic way out into the universe, and then I keep an eye open for eventual answers. And in this case, it came in the form of an image memory. And in this image, I'm walking down the street with my father, and it's winter because there are snowdrifts on either side of us. And we're walking towards the yellow house, and we're in the north, in a little town. And as the memory widens, I recall that I'd been asked to come to play with somebody who didn't speak Swedish. And this turned out to be a young Indian boy. And the thing was that he only wanted to play with his Indian gods and goddesses, these little statues, you know, very colorful things. And what he seemed to play was the stories about them, or the myths. And of course, I knew none of that. But I was absolutely mesmerized and very struck by the experience. And then what followed was a real I mean, we can call it awakening. It was like my young psyche blew open. So my father, I know what happened when I saw the photograph of Gandhi, but I think my father told me that the boy had come because his country was in upheaval and because the this man called Mahatma Gandhi had overthrown the British rulers. And I remember very distinctly seeing a photograph, not this one, it was a photograph of Gandhi standing. And he was so thin. He was so spindly. They were standing there, in sandals and in a loincloth, bare legs, benevolent smile and eyes, bald. And there truly was no way that this man could have overthrown anything, not even an ant. And in retrospect, I can really see that this was the moment when I first came into a kind of knowing that an inner world existed. Because this man clearly had something that had to do with, I thought, the secrets of the universe. And I ended up after this experience, I became very restless because I wanted whatever it was that this man had. And it was, it led me through many different paths of healing and transformation in the course of my life. But what I came to realize eventually was that I was really looking for principles to live by. And that some principles I came across, they had to do with the nature of reality, like all is one, all of life is one, is connected. And others were really these timeless, perennial suggestions, guidelines of how to live. And, and the thing is that the 12 steps are absolutely masterful at helping people align with those kind of guidelines and principles in everyday life. And they have, over time, the last 70 years, for millions worldwide, helped people cross very rough terrains and not only recover from addictive processes to substances or compulsive behaviors, but also come home to themselves, to their true self, and to really thrive. And in our time, this is something that many people are looking for. Because whether we're addicts or not, just being human can be very tricky to navigate. The way I see it is that we're both human and we're both physical and spiritual and emotional and mental and what have you. We're made up of many different parts, and to live through the reconciliation of all of that is difficult. And I think that the 12-step process has proven to work for many different human challenges. And it can be tested, on kind of anything, really, she says. But it can certainly be tried and tested and see if it will help. Being human has its limits, that's for sure. And we encounter these limits with some regularity. So the book. So this book is first and foremost a celebration and an honoring of the 12 steps, and of course the history that created them. But it's also a reminder that we have a tried and tested resource among us at the time when our familiar known structures are trembling under the weight of complexity and great stress, complications, changes. And it's a time where grassroots initiatives are really called for to help carry the burden of these vast changes that we're living through. And the yeah, I think that's it there. And the 12 steps themselves, they are at the heart of this book, but they're placed in a context of other subjects so that, you know, there are many paths of healing and transformation that use these universal guidelines and principles. And so they are, the steps are placed in with subjects that overlap. And among them is Jung's individuation, the hero's myth, and the soul's journey, and some shamanic perspectives. And the approach to these mighty subjects, you know, is symbolic, thank God, so that these subjects can be related to through indeed myths and through indeed metaphors and artworks and nutshell captions and freestanding quotations and what have you. So the that is the kind of the basic structure of the book. And it predictably begins with symbolic perception. The painter Wilhelm Hammershøi, who painted the painting on the left, he was a master at painting interiors, but he always tended to bring in light into these darkened corners. So I felt that that painting wanted to come along. So this introduction speaks about the language of connection and belonging, challenges of disconnection, the imaginal realm and co-creation, and art as awakener and storyteller. I really had to cross my fingers for so long to get this version of Eve, who is such a long-lasting symbol of, well, temptation and humanity's downfall. I really feel for her. And also, I also included the way that we can use visualizations and stuff. And so art is one of the great stimulators of symbolic perspectives. And it is, well, I mean, you know, we kind of know this, whether we create it or whether we behold it. Art is, you know, we have thousands of studies now that prove that art not only can change our biology, but also our mental and emotional health. And it can, I'm just going to check here, we can enhance learning, it can enhance community, it can enhance general well-being. And there's a book that's really wonderful that I love called Your Brain on Art, and it's by Susan Magsamen and Ivy Rose. And they speak about not only this kind of research, it's really awesome, but also the whole field of neuroaesthetics. And they say that We are now on the verge of a cultural shift in which the arts can deliver potent, accessible, and proven solutions for everyone. Of course, this is very exciting for me. And the trap of addiction is a section that focuses on the contentious subject of addiction and a few other things. And I've come to see addiction as an understandable adaptive response to society that is going through a crisis. I also see it as historically, we can see that when a society is undergoing change, the paradigm, the central myth is changing. It's gone too complex. It doesn't hold anymore. There are changes ahead. There are transitions between what has long served and what is going to serve the next chapter of evolution for the human species. And in this transition, quite often, addictive processes escalate and run rampant, I suppose. And I also see it in terms of expanding or contracting states of consciousness, because the human species indeed goes through, and this is described in various, as yuga cycles. You have all kinds of ways of looking at this. It's quite hard for me to actually explain it. It was easier to write about it. But if you imagine that the collective consciousness of humanity, it's sort of in certain eras, are more together in their activities that expand the consciousness, whereas in some eras it is more contracted. And so this is why I placed this particular section of the book within the context of expanding human consciousness. And also, you can see it in some of these. Love this illustration where you can see it. There are many ways in which humanity has just found ways of leaving or crossing the thresholds between dimensions. And I would say that there is a great longing in the human heart to indeed to belong, indeed to explore, indeed to find its place, in the greater web of life. And that this is, that this is really just something that is really just part of who we are. And Cueva de los Manos in the south of Argentina, or maybe it's Chile. And in indigenous cultures, of course, this crossing thresholds to other dimensions and relating to powers greater than oneself was really part and parcel of life. It served survival. It served the sense of needing to honor this relationship and with the invisible worlds. And for those who cross the thresholds, between the dimensions or between different states of consciousness, they were trained, they were supported, it was not your average thing to do. They were doing it on behalf of the community, and so therefore, all of these interdimensional travels were regarded as a great art And it had to be really respected, because if it wasn't, it could bring great harm to the individual and to the community itself. So therefore, you know, this was very, very, there were a lot of preparations involved. Now, in our times, something else is taking place. But first of all, I'll tell you a little bit about the distortion, you could say, of the natural longing to expand consciousness and to go beyond the limits of ordinary consciousness. Dionysus was, in the myths, he was really a symbol and a representation of spiritual ecstasy. It's funny, you know, he didn't drink to celebrate life and creation. Neither did his followers, according to what I've read. They got into trance-like states through drumming and dancing and such. And here he is seen as Bacchus, the god of wine, which is what the Romans renamed him as. And this misrepresents completely the worship of Dionysus as being, you know, alcoholic drunkenness, or whatever you want to call it, compared to spiritual intoxication. So I explore all of this in this section as well. I'm very fond of Dionysus, except that he doesn't look well at all here. So, as I was hinting at, the menu of changing consciousness today is a very long one. There are many, many, many options for mood altering, mind altering in today's world. And one of, you know, one of the difficult things that have emerged, you know, we live in a world that is rampant with addictive processes. There are so many substances now, and there are so many compulsive behaviors that are involved. And it is very different from when this took place in that very ritualistic way of bygone days, where these were sacred arts and these were sacred acts. And today, you know, when the desire rises to change where one is at, the motivation isn't necessarily to serve the community, nor to serve one's own expanding consciousness. It's very often about numbing or fleeing or giving oneself a reward, or stop obsessing about someone or something. You know, it's really an expression of a contracting collective consciousness, you could say. It's maybe a little bit generalized to say that, but... And in this section of the book, you know, it wasn't obvious to find illustrations at all. But I was very grateful to come across some in very roundabout ways. It was as if it worked with slender threads and hunches. I would come across a little something and I would follow it up. And this was the case with Sisyphus. It was in a very casual conversation that I heard somebody say that he was a modern version of Sisyphus. And I could not remember much about that myth. So I read up on it. And there was this Greek king who had been condemned to roll up boulders up a hill, only to see this boulder roll down again and again and again and again. And for me, it reflects that relentless cycle in addiction, where you are compelled to repeat, even though the result is going to be the same. And it was just so moving to know that the Greeks were already clued into all of this. And it turned out that there were hundreds of paintings of Sisyphus. So he had captured many people's imagination. And that was very delightful to find him. And of course, many, many artists have also painted scenes from their drinking life or drug life. And this is Edward Munch. It's called The Day After. And he was a binge drinker, and he eventually met a very enlightened Danish doctor who helped him get sober. And this is the other painting that really came in that very roundabout way, that speaks of addiction in a particular way, which I'm just really, really happy to have found. As you can see, it's not a particularly interesting painting. It's Van Gogh. But look at all of those poppies and drooping heads and all of that. And in classic mythology, poppies, red poppies, are associated with sleep, spells, intoxication. And you can see just, the tiredness of that in those drooping buds. And among them are these two white fluttering butterflies. And I mean, it's well known that butterflies represent metamorphosis, transformation, spiritual growth, etc. And what it reflects for me is that very often in active addiction, there is a really profound spiritual longing. But it does, it's not easy to explain that to people, just that there is a spiritual element in addiction that we don't necessarily talk about. Now, so the steps to recovery is focused on really the creation of the 12 steps. It follows the trials and tribulations of a group of alcoholics in the 1930s and onwards, who were putting to the test certain principles to live by, and found that some of them helped them stay sober. The key one was helping one another get sober. And so it's also it really follows, the whole chapter really follows the journey of Bill W., who became the co-founder of AA. And he was at death's door when his journey began. So it tells the story about this, and it's absolutely fascinating. Lots of mishaps and messes, but also so many slender threads, that weave together connections that eventually result in these extraordinary steps. And what's also amazing is that, this group of people also found the principles of unity that kept their groups really unified. Finding unity at grassroots level among recovering alcoholics or addicts is not an obvious thing to do. So the 12 traditions were created. That was during the 1940s, that have really just made it possible for the fellowship to be really, do the only job it is intending to do, and that is to have a desire to stop the particular addictive process, and to, or it's called to stop drinking, the desire to stop drinking, and to help others get sober. And so that is, it's really remarkable what they managed to achieve. And in 1938, Bill W. Started to write about their methods for this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. This is an original first edition. And he was greatly encouraged by somebody called Hank P., who was part of his inner circle in New York. And Hank P. is rather a forgotten figure in AA history, but I'll read you something from a book that's really remarkable about this time of AA history. It's written by William Scharberg, and it's called Writing the Big Book. And what he writes is that Hank came to have a central and critical role in the writing, publication, and promotion of the book, and that there are no chapters in the book Alcoholics Anonymous that are not suggested on Hank's outline. Now, this outline is something that I found at Stepping Stones, and it is in the book, like several other items, and it is just like, a series of chapter headings, practically. Now, Hank ended up giving it all to the endeavor to get the book out and other initiatives. He lost everything. He lost his marriage, he lost his business, he lost even his sobriety in the process, and could not make his way back into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous in New York. But he made a huge contribution to the creation of this book. And it has been, since this publication in 1939, it has been translated into 73 languages. And the Library of Congress in Washington also designated it the status of being one of the 88 books that shaped America. And this, I also included in this part what Bill W. became very interested in the late 40s and throughout the 50s, which was emotional sobriety. He had a history with periods of depression since his father left when he was young, and after 10 years of being sober, he started feeling depressed again, and that was in the 40s. He began to investigate whether emotional issues could benefit from the 12-step process. And in 1958, he wrote an article for the Grapevine that was called The New Frontier, because he really believed that emotional sobriety was the next major development in AA. Now, this did not happen, develop so much during his lifetime, but subsequently there are many fellowships now that really focus on recovery when it comes to various aspects of emotional issues. One of them is called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families, and it has a great reputation for such work. There are now, this leads us to the 12 steps. And helping each other recover. This is what AA has to say about the 12 steps. AA's 12 steps are a group of principles which, if practiced as a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink and enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. Now, I struggled to approach the steps, to even remotely write about them, because I felt, well, first of all, the book was really going to be a visual narration of the steps. But I realized that I would have to write about them. And I found that, between the classical AA literature and, which is so astonishingly effective when it comes to helping people stop their addictive processes, whatever the substance and the compulsive behavior. There was, who would even want to go anywhere near writing about the steps when such amazing literature already exists? And also, there are contemporary books about the 12 steps from every angle. There are hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of them, whether it is a Buddhist perspective on them, or Buddhists who are in recovery, or people who are devoted to non-dualist perspectives, or, whether it is from a woman's perspective that you want to work the steps, or maybe you want to work them gently. There is a very good book called The Gentle Path Through the 12 Steps. So this, there was a lot of resistance in me. And additionally, I found that the image collection that I had for the steps weren't really working. So I had to get out of my stuckness, and I had to get out of my own way. And I did yet another ritualistic symbolic something, which was that I went on a walk of no destination. And the rule is that you turn left where you usually or naturally would turn right, and the vice versa. And the idea is to stop looking down and just look up, or look into the far distance. And when you live in Paris and you are looking up, you're bound to find all kinds of creative things. And so I walked, and I'd been maybe an hour, maybe more, into this particular walk, when I turned right onto a very small street I didn't know. And in the middle of it, or on the side of it, was this lamppost, and it was absolutely cluttered with layers of old notices, of offers of this and that and the other. And among them was this, it was a little baby poster, you could say, of this man who was hanging his head, in his hand, and he looked like he was really in despair. And I just went, step one. That's step one. You can imagine what happens if you find the first image or the first step. Well, the doors open, I engaged, I got cracking on the writing, and it was really amazing. But finding, finding an image, I'll show it to you, but finding an image doesn't mean that you can necessarily use it. And in this case, it would take nearly 3 years to be in proper contact with the artist. He'd moved countries, etc. So here is our man, the first step, one image. And here's the spirit of it: admit powerlessness. And, the steps are suggestions only, and they are very uniquely experienced by each individual. And so I'm going to just show you a bunch of these images from the 12-step section. in the book, but I'm not going to comment on it. And this brings us to a chapter about Jung, a path to wholeness, opening to the inner world. This labyrinth is from Chartres Cathedral and was created by a man who accurately measured every single stone of the labyrinth. The people who are in charge of the cathedral, I spent many hours, they were trying to find all kinds of high-resolution images of the labyrinth for the book, but we couldn't find it. So this is an Englishman who came through with this. Now, why is this such an important image in connection with Jung? It is that, well, you know, Jung's notion of the self, our true nature, so to speak, is a center, but also the journey to the center. And the beauty of Labyrinth is that it shows you how in life we are in one way or another moving towards that center, but it's a meandering path and it is not necessarily going in the right direction, you know, of our wishes and wills. But in the end, it covers the entire field of the circle. And so you could say that, I mean, I just wrote down his suggestion was that our true nature is the self and the path there, right? It has a center, and on our way there, the path integrates the whole field of the circle. So the true nature of the self is not only the center, but the journey there. This, yeah, that's what's needed, of course, if we go on those journeys. Whoops. Now, the story of Jung's influence on the spiritual foundation of AA is very well known. And it began basically a long time ago, but Jung did not know anything about this until about 4 months before his death in 1961, when he received a letter from Bill W., who explained the chain of events and the domino effects of a meeting that Jung had had probably in 1926, according to more recent research, with a former patient, Roland Hazard, who had relapsed. And in this meeting that Bill is now telling Jung all about, Jung did not offer Roland Hazard any more sessions. Instead, he revealed that in his experience, a chronic alcoholic cannot be helped by medicine or psychology, which was a very daring thing to do in the climate of the times. But Hazard obviously wanted to have some hope for something, and Jung admitted that there was something that indeed could happen, that could help a chronic alcoholic, but it was very rare, and it was a vital spiritual experience. It was not about going to church or temple or anything. It was that you literally had to be transformed in some profound way. So Hazard went back to New York, and his cousin Susan Keith suggested the Oxford group. And this was a group of people who met. There was no leader, no membership, no fees. But there were people who were gathering to try to learn to live according to, just a few principles like honesty, unselfishness, helping one another. And anyway, Roland got sober with the help of the Oxford group and started to help other alcoholics, including Thatcher, who was one of Bill's school friends. And what subsequently happened was led to Bill being, getting sober, etc., etc. And Jung wrote back to Bill in response to his letter, and he elaborated on the fact that actually an alcoholic has a deeper thirst than the alcohol, and it needs to be quenched in order to get sober, and it doesn't really work if the substance, is stopped, because you're not quenching the deeper thirst, which in Jung's perspective was a spiritual thirst. And the amazing thing is that this letter of Jung's is at Stepping Stones Foundation, and after some negotiations, they pried it open away from the frame, and they copied it for us for the book. So it's in the book, the actual original letter of Jung's. And Jung had become familiar with AA in the 1940s through one of his students called Margarita Lüttichau. And she also knew Bill W. back in New York. And so she introduced these two men to each other's work. And for example, she gave this book, Modern Man in Search of a Soul, to Bill W. I believe that Jung's honesty with Roland Hazard about psychology and medicine not helping a chronic alcoholic recover had to do with the fact that he had had his own rock bottom. And these following images are from the section where I write about Jung's powerlessness that came after he broke with Freud. And of course, there are many concepts of Jung's that needed to be described in order to look at the overlapping principles with the 12 steps. And so you have shadow projections. But this particular one is a very significant concept of Jung's, and this painting is by Hilma of Klint, and it was painted in 1920, and it's called Buddha's Position on Earthly Life. And Jung spoke about human consciousness evolving through processes of reconciling polarities. And so, if you have two polarities that are approaching one another in order to reconcile, there's going to be a lot of tension in the middle. And it's not something that human beings like very much. It's like the sensations of difficult emotions. And so, but eventually, when they do reconcile, the tensions go. And a third solution has happened. We would, I can't think of a good example, but, take yellow and blue, the two polarities, and we end up discovering green, or, something will happen. I've suddenly become very aware of time rushing here. And so I'm going to speed through Jung's perspective, look at archetypes, the archetype of Imago Dei, very useful. And here's a man conversing with his soul, which brings us to the final section of the book, which is called Journeys of the Soul, Balancing Heaven and Earth. And here are, well, the human soul is not meant to be understood and not to be cured, but to be cared for. Thomas More. And this section is really about the hero's myth, the soul's journeys, and how they overlap also with the 12 steps. And I also speak about, the time that we're living through, and through the lens of the dark night of the soul for the human species. And I just want to read you a couple of quotations from there, which, sorry about this. No, I need to go back. So go back to here. The darkness of the night implies nothing sinister, only that the liberation takes place in hidden ways, beneath our knowledge and understanding. It happens mysteriously, in secret, beyond our conscious control. For that reason, it can be disturbing or even scary, but in the end, it always works out for the best. And then we have awakening is the goal of the spiritual journey, a stage of human consciousness that some call unity consciousness or oneness. And then, going through all these things. But just to come to the end here, I wanted to quickly run through some ideas for symbolic perception. Oh yes, the book has been translated into Spanish, French, and German as well, which is really quite remarkable. So, ideas for cultivating symbolic perception. Yeah. And there we have it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kikan. That was so beautiful. Your images are incredible, and just the meaning that is contained in each and every one of them is extensive and so important to this book. Um, I'm wondering if you have a favorite way of finding images, or what your a little more about your process for that.
Yeah, absolutely, I do. It is to call upon the muses and to go to a library and just randomly open books. That's my absolute favorite way. They always come. If you call upon the muses, and I couldn't recommend it higher than for creative work, synchronicity goes through the roof. That's the simple answer.
Yes, thank you. We do have some questions from the audience. Um, I just want to mention that this is being recorded, and there was a comment saying that they would like to have access to the list at the end for cultivating symbolic perception, since we had to go through that quite quickly. But that will be included in the recording that we can go back to and look at more closely.
That would be great. I went over time in my, I suppose, storytelling through the book. I would love it if people just benefited from those slides. It would be fantastic.
And that's not something that's contained in the book, the
No.
cultivating symbolic perception. That's specific to this.
Yeah, I created it in particular, especially for this webinar.
Great.
Yeah.
We have a question from Cindy. It says, you've shared examples of how symbolic perception played out in creating your book and given ideas of how to cultivate it. Can you give some practical examples of how I can use it in a relationship, for example, or even for issues that play out on the world stage?
My first really significant experience of using symbolic perception in a relationship came when I was working with couples. And this was in the UK. And, I would just, people had been sort of stuck in a dynamic for so long, and it was really impossible to really break out of it. And it just came to me that there was a third partner in the relationship, and that was the relationship itself. And so so I proposed, that they could look at what they would contribute to the relationship garden rather than what their partner was not doing or should be doing, etc. And some couples really took to this, and it was really quite amazing how it just loosened a very stuck situation. And so, in a way, what you can do is that, I mean, it actually also could hold for world events. If you look at a situation and see if it reminds you of a book you read or a myth or a story or a series or something that like a play is quite ideal actually. And you take a look and just see, what roles is everybody playing in this situation, and you could even say that looking at your own role in the whole thing, you could ask yourself the question, okay, I'm playing so and so, this is the role that I'm in, but what would the audience really, really, really wish my character to do? Because you need to create space. And when it comes to world events, it's very, I mean, we are overwhelmed by information now, and everything is taken literally, and truths are being diluted, and, looking at things symbolically doesn't do that. Symbols build connections and they heal broken connections. So looking at something symbolically is about looking at a whole picture. It's not about separating. And therefore, if you're looking at a situation that is so complex now in the world, you could even say, you know, what is the process that could be operating here? What is the dynamic that could be operating? And for me, the symbol of the dark night of the soul is very useful to look at through the lens. It's useful to look through the lens of the idea of the dark night of the soul at this time, because we are a dark night of the soul means that we are in the unknown and we do not have answers, but things are building that we don't see. Things are falling away that no longer serve us. So, but dark nights of the souls are just yet another transition in life, in the life of the collective. So that's something like that. Yes.
Thank you. We have a lot of people wondering about how they can get your book, and I'm hoping that we're putting a link to the Taschen website so that they can
Yeah.
purchase your book there. We have one question about one of the images that you used,
Yeah.
and you mentioned the name of the artist at the beginning, where you were talking about bringing light into the darkened corners.
Yeah.
What was the name of that artist?
His name is Hammershøi, Hammer, S probably Hoi. Willem Hammershøi is well known in Denmark. And you can also get my book on my website if you want, which is www.kikanmassara.com, where you can also get in touch if you want. I'll think about a way in which to also transmit these ideas for symbolic perception. Maybe not overnight, but well, I'm glad that people are wanting to look at the book deeper and such. That's great.
Yeah, and for those who already have it, a lot of praise for your book. Melissa says, so grateful for this book. I called it the most consequential book in my review. So grateful to you.
Oh, goodness me. Well, that's humbling, and I receive with gratitude. Thank you.
We have a question from Daniel. Did you see a shift away from Jungian individuation to a more behavioristic representation in the symbolism you've seen as the program has evolved? When Bill wanted to shift to emotions, why do you think it was so rejected?
Well, I could talk for hours on this. I'm very interested in emotions and emotional skill building. You know, in the era, it was not, emotions were not really spoken of in the same way as we do now. I think that it was just that at the time people weren't ready, but now we know that emotions are behind a lot of addictive processes. We also know that they are often the cause of relapses. We know that we are not emotionally skilled as a species. So did I notice, you know, Bill actually went, he worked with a Jungian for, I think, 4 or 5 years. But of course, you know, there is the battle of the different models of therapeutic approaches. I don't think I'm answering your question very clearly. I've definitely noticed all kinds of things on the path of writing this and of exploring all of these subjects that you know, it is not people, you know, it can still be about a substance, or it can still be about a behavior rather than a bigger perspective. There are many ways of looking at addiction. You know, it can be a social phenomenon, an economic one of isolation, one of disconnection, force from something that is higher, you know, greater than oneself. It's a big question, and it, by all means, write to me and I see if I can answer it more thoroughly.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I think we have time to take one more question. I apologize to people who have submitted questions that we haven't had a chance to get to. This is
Me
such a
too.
deep and
Apologies.
rich subject matter that I think we could probably go on for another few hours if we had the time. But
Yes.
let's see. Um, it's this question is, could you elaborate on Jung's notion of the shadow projection?
When every single one of us, even if we have great parents, will end up rejecting parts of ourselves in order to fit in. And throughout our, the conditioning of who we are as we grow up, we are always going to be wanting to be connected rather than not included. And so in the process of growing up, a lot is trimmed or rejected because we wouldn't fit in if we were like that. Or so we know that who we are, we come in and then we are conditioned by culture and parents and our experiences. And so in this sense, well, uh, oh gosh, I think I lost my train of thought there. We are so conditioned that when it comes to, I mean, the shadow is an umbrella concept for all of that which was abandoned, rejected, and all of that. And of course, when we do not engage with this material and bring it into the light, of awareness, and when we do not allow it to come in from the cold, so to speak, as we grow in our adulthood, then we end up automatically projecting it onto others because it's got to go somewhere. It's as if the projection goes past the conscious awareness onto the outer world. Jung spoke a lot about how what is hidden wants to be brought into the light of awareness. And so the stuff in the content that is in our shadow is regularly knocking on the door and saying, what about me? A red flag here and there, just wanting attention because it might not be a big deal to integrate it. But when we defend against it, well, then these things just happen. We can't help it. We just project and we project. So somebody who is, we call somebody jealous, whereas in fact we're not dealing with our own jealousy. That kind of thing. Yeah.
Perfect description. Thank you so much. And I think at this point we have to wrap things up. Thank you so much, Kikan, for this wonderful and very helpful presentation. Wouldn't it be lovely to have another one just on symbolic perception? I think there's really a desire for that, as I'm noticing in the chat, where we can delve even deeper into that. Thank you all so much for being here and taking part in this event. Please check out our website, aras.org, where you'll find our fully digitized collection, along with a number of other resources. And this is where we'll be putting the video of today's event. We'll also be notifying you about that via email. And thank you again for being with us today, and we hope to see you again.